I had 24 hours to find a wife or lose everything, and when the lawyer finally asked if anyone in that room would stand for me, it was not a friend who rose from her chair. It was the woman 3 newspapers had called the coldest name on the docks, a woman I had spoken to exactly once, encrypted and nameless, 3 years before that morning. Subscribe to the channel. You will want to be here when the chair stops scraping. The morning it started, I was sitting in a law office that smelled like old paper and older money, watching my grandfather's will get read out loud by a man who kept clearing his throat, like the clause embarrassed him too. Elias Ashwood had built Ashwood Maritime out of a single leased tugboat and 40 years of stubbornness, and he had spent the last 6 months of his life dying slowly enough to write a will that made absolutely no sense to anyone but him. The clause was simple. Cruel, but simple. If I was not married by midnight on my 27th birthday, which was that day, guardianship of my little sister and controlling interest in the company would pass to my uncle Cassian. Cassian was already smiling. He had the kind of smile that made you check your pockets afterward. 24 hours, he said, like he was tasting the words. Margot, sweetheart, nobody's proposing to a woman who smells like spreadsheets. That was the joke about me, if you wanted to call it a joke. I was an omega, with what the family generously called a scent flaw, warm fig and clean linen gone faintly wrong at the edges, the kind of signature that made people wrinkle their noses at parties and then apologize for wrinkling their noses, which was somehow worse. I had presented at 14 in a school gymnasium and spent the 13 years since being told, in 100 small ways, that I was almost right, almost pretty, almost claimable. My hands had learned to be useful instead, because useful didn't need to be liked. I did forensic accounting for a firm that undervalued me and, on the side, for anyone willing to pay for the kind of eyes that could find a lie inside a ledger. I had a sister, Wren, 11 years old, with a heart that skipped when it shouldn't, and a laugh that didn't skip at all, and I had exactly one reason to care what happened to Ashwood Maritime, and she was sitting outside in the hallway, swinging her legs off a chair too tall for her. Is there anyone? The lawyer said, not looking up from the page, going through the motion because the will required the motion. Who wishes to stand as Miss Ashwood's intended? Nobody moved. Cassian's smile widened by exactly 1 tooth. Then a chair scraped at the back of the room. I had noticed her when I came in and made myself stop noticing her, the way you make yourself stop touching a bruise. She was standing near the window in a coat the color of wet slate, and she had not said a single word through 40 minutes of legal reading, and something about the stillness of her had already put my pulse somewhere near my throat before I knew why. When she stood, the whole room's temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees, and then, strangely, warm again, the way a house does when someone finally lights the stove. I'll stand, she said. Cassian turned around slower than anyone else in the room, like he already suspected what his eyes were about to confirm and wanted to delay it as long as possible. You, he said. Isolde Marchetti, she said, to the lawyer, not to Cassian, as though he had not spoken at all. Her voice had no theater in it. It was a voice built for closing doors. I'll marry her within the 24 hours the will requires. The name did something to the room that no amount of shouting could have done. Chairs creaked as people leaned back instead of forward. The lawyer's throat-clearing habit failed him completely. I knew the name the way everyone on the Eastern Docks knew it, the way you know the name of a storm that already flooded your basement once. The Widow Queen. The woman who had taken over the Marchetti concern at 29 when her mother died and had run it since with a hand so steady that 3 rival families had quietly decided steadiness was worse than cruelty. I had never met her. I had corresponded with her exactly once, 3 years earlier, under a firm alias, when an anonymous client paid me to trace a laundering trail through a set of shipping manifests that turned out to belong, I learned only after the fact, and only by accident, to the Marchetti concern itself. I had found the rot. I had sent the report. I had never learned whether it saved her or damned someone else, and I had told myself for 3 years that it didn't matter, because that was the kind of work you did, and then walked away from. Clean hands, closed file. Her eyes found mine across the room now, and there was nothing in them I could call recognition, and yet I felt recognized anyway, the way you feel a draft before you find the open window. "You don't know her," Cassian said, and for the first time all morning his voice had an actual crack in it. "I know her work," Isolde said. "That's more than most husbands can say about a wife." She crossed the room while the lawyer fumbled for the correct forms, and she stopped close enough that I could catch her signature for the first time. Black pepper and struck flint, cold and precise, the kind of scent that told you exactly how far away the fire was, and made no promises about staying that distance. My own scent did something humiliating and involuntary, warming at the edges the way it hadn't in years, and I watched something flicker behind her composure, gone before I could name it. 24 hours, she said, only to me now, quiet enough that it felt like a private room had formed around just the two of us in the middle of a crowded office. "I assume you have opinions about that." "I have a sister," I said. It was the only sentence that mattered. Whatever this is, it protects her too. "It does," Isolde said. Or I wouldn't have stood up. The lawyer, recovering some professional footing, asked if I accepted the offer of intended marriage under the terms of the will. I looked at Cassian's face, at the way his smile had finally, completely died, and I looked at Isolde Marchetti's dark, unreadable eyes, and I said yes before I had fully decided to. The courthouse clerk who married us at 4 that afternoon, in a marriage of convenience ceremony that took 11 minutes and required no vows beyond the legal minimum, kept glancing between us like she was trying to solve a math problem that wasn't adding up. It wasn't a wedding. It was a signature on a document, a hand briefly closing over mine that was warmer than I expected and steadier than I wanted it to be. And a car waiting outside with tinted windows and a driver who called Isolde ma'am like the word cost him something to say. Ren rode with us in the back seat, unusually quiet, studying Isolde with the particular unblinking suspicion of an 11-year-old who has decided to reserve judgment. "Are you actually a Mafia queen?" Ren asked. "Or is that just what the newspapers call you because it sounds cool?" "Both," Isolde said, without looking away from the window. "Mostly the second one. Lately," Ren nodded slowly, filing this away as acceptable. I watched Isolde's mouth do something that wasn't quite a smile, careful, like it was out of practice, and something in my chest that had been braced for months finally, fractionally, loosened. The car turned through iron gates onto a private drive lined with black cypress, and the house that rose up out of the dusk was not a house so much as a decision. 3 stories of dark stone that had clearly never once wondered whether it was welcome anywhere. I felt my grandfather's pocket watch, dead and stopped at the hour he died, heavy in my coat pocket the way it always was, an old habit of carrying something that no longer worked because I hadn't found a way yet to let it be truly gone. We crossed the threshold together, my hand technically married into a world I didn't understand, and somewhere behind us, the iron gates closed with a sound like a held breath finally released. The inside of the house was colder than the outside, not in temperature, but in silence, the kind of quiet that comes from expensive things being handled by people who are afraid of them. A woman in a gray suit met us in the entry hall with an expression that could have stripped paint. "Dara," Isolde said. "My wife. Margot Ashwood." Dara's eyes moved over me the way an inspector moves over a shipment that has arrived without the correct paperwork. In 15 years, she said, to Isolde, not to me, I have never once seen you volunteer for anything at a will reading. Now you have, Isolde said, and walked past her without slowing. The rooms Ren and I were given were larger than our entire old apartment, and that first night I lay awake in a bed that smelled of nothing at all, scentless in a way that felt less like luxury and more like a room that had been waiting a long time for someone to finally live in it. Somewhere down the hall, I heard a door open once, softly and close again, and I understood, without being told, that Isolde Marchetti did not sleep easily either. The days that followed had a rhythm I hadn't expected from a woman with that reputation. Groceries appeared in the kitchen that I hadn't asked for and hadn't mentioned wanting, the exact brand of ginger tea my grandmother used to make when I was small, a discovery that made me stand very still in the pantry for a full minute before I could explain it to myself. Ren's new tutor arrived on the second morning, a retired cardiologist with a gentle voice, already briefed on her condition down to the medication schedule I had never written down anywhere Isolde could have found it. When I asked how she knew, Isolde only said, I read people the way you read numbers, and changed the subject before I could press further. Dara made her disapproval a permanent weather system. She watched me across the dinner table like she was waiting for the moment I would reveal myself as exactly what she assumed I was, some opportunist who'd married into money the fast way. I didn't blame her for it. I'd have watched me too. You worked the Holloway audit 3 years back, she said one evening, apropos of nothing, testing me, anonymous filing. Traced a laundering line through 4 shell companies in 6 days. My stomach dropped somewhere near the floor. That was confidential work. It was good work, Dara said, like the admission cost her a tooth. She kept the report. Framed, if you can believe it. In her study. I hadn't known that. I filed it away next to the ginger tea and did not know what to do with either fact, except that both of them were beginning to add up to something I wasn't ready to call by its real name. The first time Isolde touched me on purpose, it was small enough to almost not count. We were in the study, the one with my old anonymous report on the wall in a plain black frame exactly as Dara had said, and I was tracing a column of numbers in the Ashwood shipping ledgers Kasayan had finally, resentfully surrendered under the marriage's legal terms. Isolde leaned over my shoulder to look at the page, and her hand came to rest, briefly, over mine to still it on a line I'd skipped. There, she said. Read that one again. Her fingers were warm. Her scent had gone soft at the edges, black pepper losing its sharpness, and mine, I realized with something close to horror, was doing the opposite, warming further, filling the small space between us with fig and sugar, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. You framed my report, I said. Instead of anything sensible, I framed the things that outlast me, she said. Then, before I could ask what that meant, her phone rang, and whatever door had briefly opened between us closed as fast as it had cracked. She read the message on the screen, and her whole face changed, the warmth going out of it like a tide pulling back from sand. Cassian filed an injunction, she said. He's contesting the marriage in front of a judge tomorrow morning. He's also, and here her voice went very flat, very controlled, apparently been meeting with the Kovacs family for the better part of a year. I knew that name the way I knew hers, another storm, a different basement. The Kovacs run the West Docks. They run considerably more than that, Isolde said, and your uncle has been selling them access to Ashwood's shipping lanes to move product no customs officer would ever think to check on a family company with your grandfather's name still painted on the hull. The floor of my understanding rearranged itself all at once. The will, the 24 hours, the panic in Cassian's voice at the reading, none of it had ever been only about money. It had been about a deadline he needed me to fail, so the company would pass to him before anyone thought to look too closely at what he'd already been doing with it. "You knew," I said slowly. "Before you stood up in that office. You already knew what he was doing." Isolde didn't deny it, which was somehow worse than if she had. "I've had someone watching the eastern shipping lanes for 8 months, she said. Your uncle's name came up in June. Yours came up in the same file, 3 years earlier, under an alias I only connected to your face this morning, when the lawyer said your name out loud. So this was never about me," I said, and hated how much it hurt to say it, hated more that I'd let myself believe, even for a day, that a woman like her might have stood up in that office for a reason softer than strategy. "It became about you the moment you agreed to marry a stranger to protect your sister," Isolde said, and for the first time her voice lost its flatness completely. "I have run this house on control since I was 29 years old, Margot. Control is the only inheritance my mother left me that I ever wanted. I did not expect to walk into that office for a shipping route and leave it having married someone I actually wanted to keep. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't get the chance to find out, because that was the night the first attack came. It happened on the coast road, 3 days later, on the way back from the courthouse where the judge, unimpressed by Cassian's injunction, and considerably more impressed by the paperwork Isolde's lawyers produced within the hour, had thrown his case out entirely. We were in the car, Ren between us half asleep against my arm, when headlights filled the rear window too fast and too close, and the driver swore and cut the wheel, and the world became noise and metal, and Isolde's arm slamming across both of us a half second before the impact. We spun out onto the shoulder instead of into the ravine below the road, which I would later learn was the difference between a bad night and a funeral. The other car didn't stop. By the time Dara's people arrived with flashlights and radios, it was long gone, and all that was left was a smear of black paint on our rear bumper, and Ren crying quietly into my shoulder, while Isolde stood in the headlights, giving orders in a voice with no shake in it at all, though her hand, when it found mine in the dark afterward, was not steady. "Ask me to stop being careful with you," she said later that night, low, in the hallway outside my door, and I will tell you I can't. "Ask me to stop wanting you, and I'll tell you the same thing. I'm not asking either," I said. "Then what are you asking? Kiss me and find out." She did, once, careful, a question more than a claim, her hand cupping my jaw like she thought I might change my mind and wanted to leave me every chance to. I didn't change my mind. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine and breathed out slow, and I felt, more than heard, something in her finally unclench. "Tell me to stop," she said again, quieter now. "And I will." "Don't," I said. "Don't stop." We didn't go further that night. There was a child down the hall, and a car crash still ringing in both our ears, and a war with the Kovacs family gathering somewhere just past the horizon, and some doors deserve to be opened slowly. But she stayed, sitting against my headboard with my hand in hers until I fell asleep, and when I woke, the pocket watch on my nightstand had been moved, gently, closer to my hand, as though even in sleep I'd been reaching for it and she'd noticed. The days after the crash cracked something open in both of us that neither of us seemed able to close again. Isolde told me about her mother over dinner one night, plainly, without asking for sympathy. The way you report facts, you've made peace with reporting. Her mother had run the concern before her, with a doctrine carved into every room of that house. Sentiment is a knife pointed at your own throat. Isolde's father had been killed in a dock war when she was 9, and her mother's answer to grief had been to remove, systematically, every soft edge from the woman she was raising, until control was the only language left standing. I believed her for 20 years, Isolde said. I thought being unbreakable meant being alone. I'm only now starting to think I had the definition backward. I told her about the scent flaw, the gymnasium, the 13 years of being almost claimable, the freelance audit work I'd built into an armor because being needed for my hands felt safer than being wanted for anything else. I showed her the pocket watch, finally, and told her it had stopped the exact hour my grandfather died and that I'd never had it fixed, because fixing it felt like admitting the stopping mattered less than it did. She took it from me without asking, turned it over once in her palm, and said, I know a man on the docks who repairs marine chronometers. Would you let me send it to him? Only if you bring it back yourself, I said, and she smiled, real this time, the kind that reached all the way up into her eyes. We were happy for 11 days. I want that on the record, because it matters, because it makes what came after hurt the way it's supposed to. 11 days of ginger tea and Ren's laughter down the hallway, and Dara softening from suspicion into something almost like loyalty, and one evening where Isolde cooked dinner herself, badly, burning the first attempt so thoroughly that even Dara laughed, and Ren declared the Mafia queen defeated by a saucepan, an epithet Isolde wore for the rest of the week with visible, reluctant pride. 11 days. Then Cassian, having failed with lawyers and failed with a car on a coast road, tried the one thing he still had left. He took Ren. It happened from the tutor's front steps in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. A van, 3 men, a struggle brief enough that no neighbor thought to call anyone until it was already over. I was standing in the front hall reading a text from the tutor asking why Ren hadn't shown up when Dara came in white, faced with a phone in her hand, and I knew before she said a single word, because I had learned in 11 days to read that house's silences. There's a message, Dara said. Your uncle wants the company signed over by midnight. Full control. No conditions. I don't remember screaming. Isolde told me later that I did. What I remember is the floor tilting under me and Isolde's arms catching me before I hit it, and her voice, low and absolutely lethal, saying a sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. He will not survive this decision. The video came an hour later, sent to my phone from a blocked number. 11 seconds of Ren sitting in a bare room, scared but not crying, chin lifted in the same stubborn set she got from me, saying nothing because someone off camera had told her not to. It was the worst image I had ever seen, worse than the will reading, worse than the car spinning toward the ravine, my sister's face in a room I couldn't place, and I stood in that front hall holding my phone like it might shatter and understood, for the first time in my life, exactly how far I would go. I turned to Isolde. I need everything. Every shell company Cassian's ever touched, every account, every shipment log the Kovacs family let him near. You'll have it in 20 minutes, she said. It took me 4 hours to trace the location, 4 hours of numbers doing the only thing numbers had ever reliably done for me, telling the truth even when everyone around them was lying. Wire transfers that routed through 3 fake logistics firms all led, eventually, back to a single warehouse lease on the West Docks, paid for in cash, registered to a company whose director was, when I finally broke through the last shell, listed as Cassian Ashwood himself, too arrogant or too desperate to hide the trail well enough. Warehouse 14, I said, sliding the printout across the table to Isolde and Dara at just past 10 that night. West Dock. He's not even smart about it. He's scared. Scared men are the most dangerous kind, Isolde said, already moving, already pulling a coat over shoulders that had gone rigid with something I hadn't seen in her before. Not the calm control of the house, but a colder thing underneath it, old and patient, and finally, after years of restraint, unleashed, stay here. No, I said. Margot, she's my sister. I traced the money. I am not staying in this house while you go get her without me. I met her eyes and did not look away. You told me love was a choice, not a rule your mother wrote for you. Choose me in this. Let me come. Something in her face broke and reformed at once. Stay behind me the entire time, she said. That's not a request. Understood. The warehouse was lit by a single hanging bulb when we went in, Dara's people moving through the side doors first, fast and quiet, and I found Ren in the back room exactly where the video had shown her, tied to a chair but unhurt. And the sound she made when she saw me is a sound I will carry to the end of my life. Cassian was there too, and two of the Kovacs family's hired men, and for a handful of seconds the room held its breath. Then it broke all at once. One of the hired men lunged for me, and Isolde was between us before I'd finished flinching, taking a blow across the shoulder that was meant for my ribs, absorbing it without a sound beyond a sharp exhale, and Dara's people had the man on the ground before I'd even processed what had happened. Cassian, cornered, went for a gun in his coat, and Isolde crossed the distance to him in 3 strides and had him against the wall by the collar before the weapon cleared its holster, her forearm at his throat, her voice gone somewhere colder than I had ever heard it. Give me one reason, she said, not to end this the way my mother would have. Cassian's face had gone the color of the concrete floor. Isolde, that's not my name to you. I stepped forward, my hand closing around her arm, not pulling, just present. Isolde, look at me. She didn't move for a long, terrible second. He's not worth what it costs you to do it, I said. I need him in a courtroom, not a grave. I need Ren to grow up, knowing her sister chose the harder thing when it mattered. Let him go. I have everything we need to bury him with paper instead. The arm at Cassian's throat eased, slowly, like something releasing a held breath it had been keeping for 20 years. You're fortunate, Isolde said to him, stepping back, that my wife has better judgment than I do. Then, to Dara, hold him for the police. Every account Margot traced, hand it to them directly. It was Ren, still shaking in my arms, who broke the last of the tension. Told you she has swords, she whispered against my shoulder, and somehow, impossibly, I laughed, wet and shaking, right there in that terrible warehouse, because grief and relief had never once, in my experience, respected each other's boundaries. The trial moved faster than I expected, mostly because I had spent 13 years learning exactly how to make numbers testify. I stood in front of the district attorney's board 3 weeks later with a projector and a stack of ledgers and walked a room full of lawyers, reporters, and one visibly furious uncle through 11 months of laundered shipping manifests, false invoices, and wire transfers that traced, line by line, straight back to Cassian Ashwood's signature. The same crowd that had once watched him call me a woman who smelled like spreadsheets now watched him escorted out in handcuffs while flashbulbs went off like a small, righteous storm. The Kovacs family's local operation collapsed within the month under a federal indictment that used my audit as its foundation exhibit. Cassian was sentenced to 11 years. Ashwood Maritime, cleared of every shadow he'd draped over it, came back to me, fully, cleanly, mine. Isolde stood at the back of that press room the whole time, arms crossed, watching me the way Dara had once watched me for weaknesses, except her expression held nothing but a fierce, quiet pride that I felt land somewhere under my ribs like sunlight. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, in front of cameras neither of us had asked for and reporters shouting questions we didn't answer, she took both my hands in hers. "I told you once that love was a choice," she said. "I want to choose you properly this time. Not a clause in a will, not 24 hours on a clock, just you, if you'll still have me." "Ask me properly then," I said, and she laughed, short and surprised, like the sound had escaped before she'd planned it. "Margot Ashwood," she said, "will you let me claim you the way I should have asked from the start? Not because a will required it, because I choose no one else for as long as either of us is breathing." "Tell me you mean it with your teeth as well as your words," I said, and heard my own voice shake on it. "Ask me with your words," she said, "and I will show you exactly how much I mean it." I asked. She showed me, gently, thoroughly, that night, in a house that finally, after everything, smelled like both of us at once. Black pepper and fig, struck flint and warm sugar, twined together in every room. The bite came where the bond always comes, at the curve of my throat, after she had asked me twice more if I was certain, and I had said yes both times without hesitation. And when it settled, I felt something click into place in my chest that I hadn't known was missing until it wasn't anymore. A bond thrumming low and steady, her feelings suddenly audible to me the way a heartbeat is audible with your ear against someone's chest. Relief, reverence, a fear finally letting go. The wedding, the real one, happened 6 months later in the garden behind the house, under cypress trees strung with small lights, Wren as the world's most self-important flower girl, Dara standing up as witness with an expression that had softened from suspicion into something suspiciously close to affection. The vows were short. Isolde had never been a woman of excess words. "I spent most of my life being told that control was the same thing as strength," she said, holding both my hands in front of everyone who mattered to either of us. "You taught me the difference. I choose you, every day, on purpose, for the rest of my life." "I spent most of mine being told I was almost enough," I said back. "You're the first person who never once made me feel like I needed to be anything other than exactly what I already was. I choose you back." Dara gave a small, formal speech afterward that ended unexpectedly, with her voice catching. "In 15 years, she said, raising her glass, I never once saw her wait for anyone. Now I can't imagine her waiting for anything else." It was, from Dara, the equivalent of an aria. A year on, the pocket watch sits on the windowsill of our bedroom, repaired exactly as promised, its hands moving steadily through mornings that no longer feel like they're being counted down to a deadline. Wren's heart, thanks to specialists Isolde found and I would never have been able to afford alone, has steadied into something the doctors call, with visible relief, boring Ashwood Maritime runs clean under my hand, its ledgers open, its manifests honest, its name back to meaning exactly what my grandfather built it to mean. Cassian writes letters from prison sometimes that I don't answer. I don't need to. The numbers already said everything that needed saying. Some mornings I wake before Isolde does and watch the light come up gray and then gold across the room we share, and I think about a girl in a gymnasium who was told, at 14, that she was almost right. And I think about a woman who stood up in a lawyer's office and made that girl, finally, completely, whole. Being seen was never the reward at the end of the story. It was the whole story, all along, waiting for someone patient enough to notice. The end. If this is the kind of story that finds you when you need it most, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you too. I'd love to know, if you had 24 hours and everything on the line, whose name would you have hoped to hear called across that room? Tell me in the comments. Until the next story, stay close, stay warm, and I'll see you there.